I was 17 when my dad flinched at something I said like I'd grown a second head. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was his birthday party. I had baked the cake. In our family, silence was obedience. Questions were suspicion. Mom had her wooden spoon and Dad had his stare. You learned quickly what not to say. What not to be. We didn't do hugs. We didn't do long talks about feelings. We did doing. You showed love by completing chores, by staying out of trouble, by never making things harder than they already were. I followed the rules. I got straight A's, kept my room neat, didn't talk back. I didn't ask for rides to parties. I didn't ask for much of anything. I stayed small and useful. I learned how to be invisible without disappearing. But something had shifted. I had my license now. I was driving myself places. I was going to school events without begging. I was saying no more often, gently, carefully, but still. I had a voice and I was just starting to use it. Not loudly. Just enough to be noticed. And then came Dad's 52nd. A quiet dinner at home. Just us five, me, Marissa, Mom, Dad, and Uncle Donnie. I offered to make the cake, chocolate rum torte. Dad's favorite. I found the recipe online, bought the ingredients with my own money, even cleaned the kitchen afterward. It felt like a grown-up gesture. Like I was hosting, not just participating. I wanted to show that I could be something more than the quiet daughter in the corner. The batter tasted strong. I didn't water it down. I figured the alcohol would cook off. I served it proudly with whipped cream I made from scratch. Everyone ate in silence until Dad spoke. You made this? I nodded. Yeah, from scratch. He looked at Mom. You let her use the rum? I didn't know, she said too quickly. It cooks off, I said, keeping my voice calm. There's barely any left. It's safe. His fork paused midair. He looked at me like I'd said something obscene. He didn't answer. Just stared. She's not a little girl anymore, Bill, Mom murmured. That was it. Nothing exploded. No screaming match. But something broke. Or maybe it clicked into place. From that day on, things were different. Dad stopped giving me chores. He stopped asking where I was going. But he also stopped looking me in the eye. Like I was a stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. The silence changed tones. Before it was the quiet of routine. Now it was avoidance. Tension hummed in every room. I noticed it most on Thursday nights. That used to be our thing. Dad and I would watch reruns of old detective shows together. Monk Psych, sometimes Columbo. He'd make popcorn, I'd pick the episode. We'd sit on the scratchy brown couch in companionable silence, guessing plot twists and sharing the same bowl of popcorn. But the week after the cake, he didn't say a word. Just turned on the TV and sat there. No popcorn. No glance my way. Like I wasn't invited. Like I didn't belong. I stood in the hallway watching him. It hurt more than I expected. I don't even like detective shows that much. It wasn't about the program. It was about being seen. It was about being included. I went to my room and shut the door. Marissa noticed the shift too. She was 23, still living at home while trying to get through nursing school. She floated between roommates, jobs, and questionable boyfriends, always landing back at the house when life collapsed. We weren't close, but she had this way of cutting to the truth when she wanted. He's acting weird with you, she said one afternoon as we folded laundry in the living room. Yeah. What did you do? Served him cake. She snorted. That'll do it. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously. You grew up. That's what you did. You walked in there like a grown-ass woman and reminded him he's getting old. Men hate that. Especially Dad. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't just the cake. It was everything it symbolized. Independence. Confidence. Control. I didn't ask permission. I just did it. And he couldn't stand it. One night a few weeks later I caught Uncle Donnie out on the back porch. He was nursing a beer, chain-smoking like the 90s never ended. He saw me through the screen door and waved me out. Hey, birthday baker. I rolled my eyes. Don't start. No, seriously. Good cake. Real smooth finish. You got steady hands. I sat across from him. The porch light buzzed above us, casting everything in a weird yellow tint. He's proud of you, you know, Donnie said, exhaling smoke. He just doesn't know what to do with it. With what? You. Being grown. He sees it, but he can't handle it. Makes him feel old. Useless, maybe. I stared into the yard. The grass looked overgrown. The fence sagged. Everything was aging quietly. He said you looked like your mom when you served that cake, Donnie continued. Said you had her same look. Control. Calm. Like the room shifted when you walked in. Something inside me cracked a little, because that was exactly how I had felt. And I had liked it. You're not a kid anymore, he said. And he knows it. But for guys like your dad, that kind of knowing feels like loss. I didn't respond, just nodded slowly, because I finally understood. He wasn't mad at me for baking a cake. He was grieving. And I was the funeral. That was the day I stopped trying to shrink myself. That was the day I realized I didn't need to wait for his permission to grow up. After the cake, things didn't blow up, they faded. Our home became a museum of what not to say. The quiet grew roots and made itself comfortable. It was as if I had stepped into some alternate version of our house, one where everyone still moved the same but nothing meant what it used to. I started noticing small things first. My name stopped being called for dinner. Mom would just yell, "Food," and leave it at that. Nobody stopped me from serving my own plate last, which used to be a way of showing politeness. Now it was just convenient. There was no conversation around the table, just chewing and silverware against ceramic. Thursday night rituals died quietly. My spot on the couch sat empty. The popcorn stayed in the cabinet. My dad watched his shows like I was a stranger who lived upstairs. School became my refuge. I stayed late for study groups I didn't need. I joined the yearbook team even though I didn't care about layouts. Anything to delay coming home. One evening as I walked in the door at 9, Dad looked up from his recliner for the first time in days. He didn't say hi. He didn't say where have you been. He just grunted. You working now or just running around? I stared at him for a second longer than I should have. Studying. He grunted again and turned back to the TV. That night, Marissa came into my room without knocking. She sat on the edge of my bed, toying with the fringe on the blanket. You know, she said. He used to be proud of you. Before he got scared of you. What does that even mean? She picked at the thread. You're the first person in this family who actually scares him with your ambition. He doesn't know how to parent a daughter who doesn't need him. I looked at her then. Really looked. Her hair was messy, her scrub stained. A tiredness in her bones that went deeper than a long shift. I'm sorry, she added. He did this to me too. But I let him shrink me. You didn't. We sat in silence for a while. That was maybe the first time we saw each other as something other than rivals or roommates. Just two daughters caught in the same undertow, trying to swim in opposite directions. The following week something strange happened. Uncle Donnie asked me if I wanted to come with him to pick up lumber from the hardware store. Why? I asked. He shrugged. You're the only one in the house with any damn common sense. So I went. We drove with the windows down, the radio playing soft classic rock. It felt normal, like something fathers and daughters were supposed to do, even if it wasn't my father driving. At the store, he let me choose the wood stain for the bench he was building. You got good taste, he said. Not like your old man. He thinks mahogany's too fancy. I smiled for real. When we got home, he handed me a pair of safety glasses and a sanding block. You're helping now. No freeloaders. So that's what we did, every Saturday for the next 3 weeks. We built a bench for the backyard. Me and Uncle Donnie sanding and staining, measuring twice, cutting once. He never once brought up the cake. But he did talk about Dad. He used to be different, you know? He said one afternoon while wiping sawdust from his hands. Before you were born. He laughed more. Used to be the guy who'd dance in the kitchen with your mom just to make her spill her coffee. What happened? I asked. Donnie looked toward the house. Life. Work. Your grandpa dying. Then. Marissa dropping out, your mom getting sick for a while, bills piling up. He started thinking in terms of control. That if he couldn't fix it, he'd at least rule it. And now he can't rule you. It made sense. But it didn't make it okay. Later that night, I asked Mom if she remembered Dad ever dancing. She looked up from the sink, a dish still in her hand. Not for a long time, she said softly. Then, he's not mad at you. He's afraid you'll leave. Why would he think that? Because he knows he didn't give you a reason to stay. The words sat heavy between us. By the time senior year came to a close, I'd been accepted into 2 out-of-state colleges. Dad didn't say a word when the envelopes arrived. He just left them on the kitchen counter unopened. Marissa high-fived me. Mom hugged me. Uncle Donnie made a joke about the school mascot. But Dad? Nothing. It wasn't until late one night that he said anything. I was in the garage, organizing a box of my stuff to take with me. He came in for a beer, paused when he saw me, then said, "You'll do fine out there." I froze. He kept his back to me. "Just don't forget where you came from." I wanted to scream. What does that even mean? But I didn't. Instead I said, "Thanks." And that was the extent of his blessing. The night before I left, I put the bench Donnie and I built in the backyard. I sat on it for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the old fence. I wasn't sure if my family had noticed I wasn't a kid anymore. But I had. And maybe that was enough. Summer passed quickly. The kind of quick that doesn't feel like motion but rather evaporation. One day it was June. And the next I was standing in front of my packed car, trying to convince myself I wasn't about to cry. I had everything. Sheets for a twin XL bed, a cheap mini fridge from Craigslist, books, pens, and more socks than I'd ever owned at one time. Mom triple-checked the checklist she found online. Marissa gave me her old curling iron, even though I rarely did my hair. Uncle Donnie slipped me a crisp $100 bill folded into a pack of gum. And Dad? Well, Dad didn't help me pack. Instead, he washed the car without saying a word. It was his version of a goodbye. Clean tires, full tank, windshield scrubbed until it sparkled. I watched him from the porch, my duffel bag at my feet. There was so much I wanted to say. But his silence made it impossible. When I finally got into the car, I found a small envelope tucked under the wiper blade. My name in his blocky mechanic's handwriting. I opened it an hour into the drive. Just a folded sheet of paper with a few lines. I was never good at this part. You'll be okay. Better than okay. Just don't let them change who you are. Dad. No, I love you. No, I'm proud of you. But something in that short note cracked me wide open. I pulled over at the next rest stop and cried with the car idling. College was overwhelming. My roommate was loud and obsessed with astrology. My classes were harder than I expected, even though I had always been a straight-A student. The campus felt like a maze and everyone else seemed to have already found their people. I called home once a week. Mom gave me updates on the garden. Marissa told me when she'd passed another nursing exam. Donnie made jokes about joining a frat. But Dad never got on the phone. "Your father's out in the garage," Mom would say. Or watching the game. Or asleep. And I stopped asking. But then something strange happened. I started getting letters. Real ones. Postmarked from home. No return address, no signature, but always addressed to me in that same mechanical print. They were never long. Sometimes just a paragraph. "Heard your team lost. That's all right. Losing teaches you more than winning. You'll make better friends once midterms are over. Everybody's fake until they're tired. Don't let your roommate borrow your car. Trust me." The advice was weirdly specific and always on time. He never once said he missed me. But somehow I could feel it in every sentence. Fall turned to winter. I went home for Christmas expecting more distance. But something had shifted. Mom met me at the door with a full-body hug. Marissa had made hot chocolate. Donnie greeted me with a ridiculous hat that said college girl. And Dad? He was in the living room pretending to read the paper. But he looked up. Just once. "Car holding up?" "Yep." He nodded. "Good." That was our hello. Later that night, as I unpacked in my room, I noticed something new on my shelf. A framed photo of me at graduation, standing between Marissa and Mom. Someone had taken the time to print it, frame it, and place it there. I knew it wasn't Mom, she was more of a fridge magnet type. And Marissa didn't own a printer. When I walked back into the kitchen, Dad was putting leftovers away. I opened the fridge, grabbed a soda, and paused. "Thanks for the picture." He didn't look at me. Donnie made me do it. I smiled. "Still. Thanks." We stood in the kitchen in our quiet way. Not quite hugging. Not quite not. The next morning I woke up to find him at the table, scribbling in a notebook. He looked startled to see me. Couldn't sleep, I said. He pushed a cup of coffee toward me. You still take it black? Yeah. I sat down. Neither of us spoke. But for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small box. This was mine in college, he said. Didn't have fancy apps or planners. Just this. It was an old pocket compass. The kind you'd use in the woods. He flipped it open, pointed at the needle. Doesn't matter where you are. What matters is knowing where you're going. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thanks. He shrugged. It's probably busted. But I figure if you ever get really lost, you'll remember you've already been found. And I did. Over and over again. Even now, years later, I keep that compass in my glove compartment. And the letters? I saved them all. Junior year hit like a wall of bricks. I was deep in my major by then, psychology, and everything felt heavy. Trauma, grief, family dynamics. The textbooks were mirrors I didn't always want to look into. I kept thinking about the stuff we never talked about at home. That spring, I had to write a final paper on attachment theory. My professor encouraged us to use our own families as case studies if we felt comfortable. I didn't, not really. But I did it anyway. I wrote about silence. About how love can be conditional without anyone saying it out loud. About how the absence of warmth doesn't always mean the absence of care. But how a kid doesn't know the difference. When I turned it in, I felt raw. Like I'd peeled back too many layers. My professor loved it. Asked if I'd ever considered publishing. I said no. I didn't want strangers reading about my dad scrubbing the car instead of saying goodbye. A few weeks later, I got a call from home. Mom sounded calm at first, but there was something in her voice, tightness. He's in the hospital, she said. Just overnight. Chest pain. They think it's stress. I froze. Is he okay? They're running tests. I booked a train ticket immediately. When I got to the hospital, he looked smaller somehow. Like the weight he carried had finally settled on his shoulders instead of behind his eyes. He was hooked up to machines but awake. Alert. Hey, I said. He gave me a tired nod. They're saying I need to slow down. Don't know how to do that. I can teach you, I joked, but my voice cracked halfway through. He didn't smile. Just looked at me like he wanted to say something he didn't have the language for. That night, after visiting hours ended, I stayed at home. Marissa had moved out finally. She was engaged to someone decent, a paramedic named Eli. Mom looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. He's scared, she said, handing me a cup of tea. He won't say it, but I can tell. What about? Losing the right to be needed. I let that sit. I'm not trying to replace him. I know that. But he doesn't. He sees you doing everything he was never allowed to do. He sees you building a life he doesn't understand. We sat in silence. Then she added, but he's proud. You know that, right? I do. Now. She smiled. Good. Because he won't say it until he thinks you don't need to hear it anymore. The next morning I visited him again. This time I brought a notebook. Write something, I said, handing it to him. Just one thing every day. Doesn't have to be big. He rolled his eyes. Homework. Therapy. He didn't argue. Just took the notebook and placed it on the side table. A month after he was discharged, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't in his usual block print. It was neater. Smaller. But still him. I read your paper. Your mom sent it to me. I didn't understand all the terms, but I got the gist. You were right about a lot of things. I didn't know how to show love the way you needed. But I never stopped loving you. Not once. I cried. Again. Because apparently that's what adulthood is. Crying in your apartment over things your parents couldn't say 20 years ago. Summer came and I visited more. Not because I had to. 'Cause I wanted to. We sat in the backyard on the bench Donnie and I built. Watched the birds. Talked about small things. Engine parts, weather patterns, my plans after graduation. Then one day out of nowhere he asked, did I mess you up? I blinked. What? He looked straight ahead. Be honest. All those years. Did I break something? I took a deep breath. You didn't break me. But you made me work harder to trust people. To believe I was worthy of softness. He nodded slowly. That's fair. But, I added, you also made me resilient, and careful, and precise. You taught me how to stand alone. He finally turned to look at me. That wasn't the goal. I know, but it helped. We didn't say anything else that day. We didn't need to. That fall I applied for graduate school. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a therapist, but I knew I wanted to stay close to the questions I'd spent my life asking. The day I got my acceptance letter, I drove straight home. Mom squealed. Marissa texted me a dozen emojis. Donnie popped champagne at 2 p.m. And Dad? He handed me a box. Inside was the notebook. He'd filled every page. 1 entry per day. Notes, memories, questions. Some were boring grocery lists, car maintenance tips. Others were startling. March 14th. I remember the first time she asked me what sadness was. She was 5. I didn't know how to explain it. April 22nd. I thought being a father meant being the roof. I didn't realize I needed to be the door too. May 5th. If I could go back, I'd teach her how to cry before I taught her how to fix things. I read every page that night, sitting on the bench under the porch light. And I realized something I hadn't before. My family didn't just notice I wasn't a kid anymore. They mourned it. But they also honored it. In their own way, in their own time. And that meant everything. Graduation day came hot and early. The kind of humid that made your cap stick to your forehead and your robe feel like a punishment. But I didn't care. I walked across the stage, shook hands, and when I looked out at the crowd, they were all there. Mom waving like she was signaling a plane. Marissa with a homemade sign that read, "Big Brain Baby." Uncle Donnie holding up his phone to film. And Dad, standing, clapping, crying. We took pictures outside under a giant oak tree. For once, no one was in a rush. Marissa stole my cap and made everyone pose wearing it. Mom packed sandwiches in a cooler like it was a tailgate. Donnie brought champagne again, this time at an acceptable hour. When I hugged Dad, he held on a little longer than usual. Just long enough for me to notice. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. I wanted to laugh, cry, and collapse all at once. I nodded instead. After graduation, I moved back home for a while. Rent was high and I had student debt looming, so it made sense. But it felt different now, less like a return and more like a visit with no deadline. The house hadn't changed, but I had. And so had they. Dad started showing me how to fix things around the house. "If you're going to live on your own," he said, "you should know how to snake a drain and shut off a water line." We replaced the water heater together one Saturday. He let me do most of the work. That was new. We started talking more. About small stuff at first, weather, car models, the neighbors. Then about bigger things. About fear. Regret. The weight of being needed, then suddenly not. He told me about losing his job years ago, how he kept it from all of us for 6 months. About the loan he took out to keep the lights on. About how helpless he felt when he realized his daughters were growing into women. He didn't know how to help. "Men in our family don't talk about failure," he said. "We just bury it in the yard and hope nothing grows." I told him about therapy. About the tools I was learning, the mistakes I was unlearning. How silence wasn't the same as safety. He listened. Really listened. Marissa got married in the fall. It was a small ceremony in a park with string lights and a taco truck. Eli cried during his vows. Dad did too when he thought no one was looking. At the reception, he danced with Marissa to an old Motown song, spinning her like she was still 7. When it was my turn, he took my hand and led me onto the grass. "I owe you a lot of dances," he said. We didn't talk much while we danced. But we didn't need to. Later that year, I got my first real job offer. Not an internship, not a part-time gig. A full-time counseling role at a youth center 2 hours away. It was everything I'd worked for. When I told my parents, Mom cried again. Dad just nodded, then left the room. I found him in the garage 10 minutes later. "You okay?" I asked. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Yeah, just had to check something." "I'm not disappearing," I said. He looked up. "I know. Doesn't make it easier." That night he handed me a folder. Inside were printouts, budget templates, renter's checklists, emergency contacts. A handwritten list of things to check when signing a lease. He'd even slipped in a spare key for a tool set he built for me in a small metal box. "I don't want you calling a stranger if your sink leaks," he said. I left 2 weeks later. The car was stuffed to the brim. Marissa and Eli came to wave me off. Donnie brought sandwiches again. And Dad? He checked the tire pressure one last time, then handed me one more note. Just 3 words. Call me sometimes. I did. Every week. The calls were awkward at first, then easier. He told me about his new hobby, wood carving. He made me a jewelry box and a weirdly shaped spoon. I loved them both. One night, 6 months into my job, I called him crying. A client had said something that hit too close. I didn't know how to handle it. He listened, said nothing for a long time. Then, I used to think strength meant silence. But you're the strongest person I know, and you never shut up. I laughed through tears. Is that a compliment? Best I've got. I went home for Christmas that year. The house was different now. Softer. Warmer. There was a tree with too many ornaments. Marissa and Eli had brought their dog. Mom had framed my graduation photo. Donnie had built a new bench. And Dad? He'd left a present under the tree with my name on it. Inside was the compass. Polished, repaired. With a new engraving. You always knew where you were going. That night we sat by the fire sipping cider. He looked over at me and asked, "When do you think we noticed?" Noticed what? That you weren't a kid anymore. I smiled. When I served the cake. He chuckled. Figures. Then he said, "You grew up so quietly. We didn't see it until you were gone." But I came back. Yeah, you did. He leaned back, eyes closed. Next time, don't wait so long. I won't. And I didn't.